All right, welcome to my class. Oops. Okay, so Intro to Genetic Genealogy. This is a presentation I created for a class. My name is Katherine Jenkins. I'm a student at BYU Idaho University studying genealogy and family history. My degree will actually be in professional studies, but I have focused and specialized in family history and specifically genetic genealogy. So I'm still learning a lot, and so I don't have all the answers, but hopefully this will help some of you make a decision on if you're thinking about getting a DNA test done, if you are wondering which kind of DNA test to get done or what it will help answer. This is kind of the right place. So we'll get started. All right, so why you might be interested in genetic genealogy. So there's going to be a lot of reasons. You may want to do a DNA test, but you don't know which one. You may have an adoption story that you want to know more about. You may already have taken a DNA test, but you aren't sure what the results mean. You maybe want medical information about your family members or yourself. You may want to learn more about your ethnicity or where your family originated. You may hope to identify more relatives and verify information on your family tree. So all great reasons to take a DNA test. So there are different types of DNA tests available, and some may be familiar to you, some may not. So AT-DNA, that first one, is actually autosomal DNA, and that is a really common one. If you've gotten a test at Ancestry, you've gotten an autosomal test. So this studies the coding found on the non-sex chromosomes. It's really good for overall genealogical research. It's definitely the most common. And biological female and male individuals can test using autosomal DNA. X-DNA is included in most autosomal tests. The coding, so when you take an autosomal test, most of the time your X-DNA will also be a part of that. So you don't often have to pay extra for it. Coding is found on the X sex chromosome, and biological male and female individuals do have X-DNA. Y-DNA. So Y-DNA is passed down through the paternal line. It has a larger reference population to look at. It just offers more to know. And it's just for biological male individuals. So biological female individuals cannot test. And then whole genome testing kind of gives you all of the information, and it helps a lot with health mutations and indicators. It's the most expensive. And biological male and female individuals can test. And then mitochondrial DNA testing. Mitochondrial DNA is passed down through the direct maternal line, and it's more focused on, especially on European records, you'll get a lot of information right now based on the reference populations we have. And then biological male and female individuals can test for that as well. So all right, so where should I test? So there's a lot of great places. There's more than even these that are on this chart. Ancestry DNA, Living DNA, 23andMe, Family Tree DNA, MyHeritage, and then there's Nebula or sequencing. Those are two that work with whole genome sequencing, which we'll talk a little bit about as well. Ancestry DNA has autosomal DNA testing. Living DNA has several different ones. They have autosomal, Y-DNA, mitochondrial. 23andMe has autosomal testing. Family Tree DNA offers autosomal Y-DNA and mitochondrial DNA testing. MyHeritage at this point is autosomal only, and Nebula or sequencing has whole genome sequencing, as we discussed. And so whole genome sequencing, I'll just chat a little bit about this for a minute. Is really focused on the health history and really getting a huge overall picture. It's also the most expensive, and it's unlikely to be as helpful just for basic genealogical research as others. And so it's really for a very specific purpose if you're looking for a certain mutation. It also often requires genetic counseling to interpret those results. It's not something that you can easily figure out on your own. And so, and even a genetic genealogist may need more help, sending it up for, more genetic counseling. And so just keep that in mind. Whole genome sequencing can be really cool, but that's probably the one we will talk about the least. However, I will go through it at the end. These other ones all are great, reputable places, and we'll go through other ideas as we go through these slides. We'll talk about more of them. All right, so there are risks and limitations for genetic testing as well. So, and it's important that everyone know these before you test because, it can be hard, some of these results that you can find. And so genetic testing can bring surprises such as non-paternity events, complicated new relationships that you find, and even inherited conditions that you discover. You may not find what you were looking for as well. A lot of times people are taking a test for a very specific hope of finding somebody or finding something about themselves, and sometimes that doesn't happen. So that can be disappointing and feel discouraging. Certain areas certainly have better reference populations. We talked about Europe a little bit, and right now we're trying to do a little bit better about getting research done in other areas as well. Genetic testing also still really requires traditional genealogical skills to confirm and find answers. These are going to give you leads and hints, and we'll talk a lot about that as well, but it's not going to give you every answer. And then I always recommend CLIA accredited laboratories that provide reliable results. Now, all the ones that we mentioned are pretty reliable and good companies, but if you're going outside of that, and especially if you're getting whole genome sequencing or health testing, you want to look for those CLIA. Just to know that it's definitely a reputable place to test at. Also, privacy terms, this has come up a lot lately, is that in some situations, results are shared with law enforcement. And so you always want to look at the privacy terms. Most companies have now changed so that you either have to opt in to share with law enforcement, or it's only shared if a subpoena is, if law enforcement provides a subpoena. Otherwise, they don't share that information. All right. So when to choose an autosomal test then? So you may want one when you want an overall visual of your DNA connections and the close matches you have. It may be when you aren't sure if the objective is in your paternal or maternal line. You may want this if you need to identify third cousins or closer relations with more accuracy. So that's kind of as far back where it's more accurate. You'll still find more, and they may be great leads and great hints, but third cousins or closer relations with more accuracy. When you are hoping to see xDNA results, because this is included in almost all of the autosomal tests. It can also work if you want more information about health and trait information available at select companies. So there are a few companies, including 23andMe, that will give you a little bit of health and trait information. It's very limited, but it is helpful and can kind of lead you. It will test for a few markers. All right, so what are ethnicity estimates? So a lot of autosomal DNA also does something that's very popular and wanted. Everyone wants to know where they originated from. And these are called ethnicity estimates, also known as biogeographical estimations. And it's the process of comparing small segments of your DNA to people on a website, a reference population. So if you're taking it on Ancestry, to everyone on Ancestry, and they're comparing it to find which similar parts of your DNA of those segments match, so that they can kind of narrow it down further to where your ancestors may have lived. So, and different testing companies will likely have different results. And sometimes that can be concerning, or you might start to not trust the results that you're getting. Often it's just because the reference populations are different. And so when you're looking at ethnicity estimates, it's important to know that it is always evolving and changing, because as they get more people to test at that certain place, it creates more specific or helpful information for their algorithm to work and to be able to compare more and more and more segments to help narrow down more hints for you. Again, if you focus on it as hints, these are clues for me to find people that I may be related to or where I may be from. And then I can do more genealogical research and learn about that. It's going to be really helpful. But if you go on and see where you're from, and then it changes, or then you go to another place and it's a different one, that can be really disappointing. So just really know that this doesn't mean that it's wrong. It just means that it is constantly evolving based on the reference populations that are available. And it's just kind of like more clues, more hints to where you're from. All right, so there's amazing autosomal testing features available outside of Ancestry or 23andMe. What you can do is you can take your results if you've gotten autosomal testing done there, and you can actually extract them. You can ask to download your DNA, and then you can upload it at different places. And some of these testing features are really, really helpful and really cool. So some of them are Genetic Affairs, offers tools that group your DNA together into clusters so that you can match them. All of these have a little bit of a learning curve, so I wouldn't necessarily say this is where you should start. And it may require you to watch some YouTube videos to understand these websites. It's also important, again, to pay attention to privacy. When you're downloading your DNA, you're obviously making it a little bit more vulnerable, and then you're uploading it somewhere else to a third-party site. You just have to be aware of what you're doing with it. And then GEDmatch lets you upload your DNA tests from other companies to compare and find additional matches. And GEDmatch is very popular and very known, and a really, really great resource. DNA Painter is a chromosome mapping tool, and this is really cool. It does take a little bit of time to learn how to use it, but it can really help you to identify ancestors by mapping segments of your DNA to chromosomes, like figuring it out through DNA. You're basically creating like a DNA family tree. It's pretty cool. All right. There are a few other third-party tools for DNA research. Some of those are chromosome browsers, and some of these are available in the site you test at. So in the place, like the Ancestry has some of these tools, 23andMe has some of these tools, but also you can, again, download it and upload it somewhere else for others, depending. So some of these places will offer third-party raw DNA uploads, which is what we talked about. I should also say that Ancestry and 23andMe does not let you upload DNA from another site to theirs. They only let you download, but some sites do allow it. You might be able to find more help traits, more information, more medical data at certain third-party places. Mitochondrial and Y chromosome integration is one that can be really cool, because if you get both of those done, you can integrate them together and kind of study that. DNA painting tools, we kind of talked a little bit about that. That's the chromosome family tree. And then understanding a little bit more on criteria for X chromosome segments can be really helpful. One little side note is that while using a third-party tool this last semester, I actually discovered that I had a unique and kind of rare marker for a health condition. And then when I took it into my doctor, we ended up doing some testing, and I actually was diagnosed with that through DNA third-party tools. So this is totally something that can be helpful. All right, so when to choose a Y DNA test. So when the answer to an objective or what you're wanting to solve would be found in a father to son relationship or on the paternal line, that's when you want to choose a Y DNA test. It might be when you want to measure genealogical distance for a paternal line, and you have a direct father to son line to test. So if a father has only girls, and doesn't have a son, there won't be that direct line. But sometimes you can use uncles, you can think through this. But yeah, you need a direct paternal line to test. When you are familiar or able to hire someone who can do segment and shared match triangulation with clusters to help draw conclusions. It is true that Y DNA, and this is the same for mitochondrial DNA, requires quite a bit of knowledge about it and has a high learning curve. So when you get these tests done, you then may need to follow up with getting some additional genealogical help. So that's something to think about. And then when you want to search by surname with traditional genealogical methods. So you're really looking, especially on the Y DNA, you're looking through surnames and trying to follow that path all the way down. All right. So when to choose a mitochondrial DNA test. So this would be when the answer to an objective would be found in a mother to child relationship or on the maternal line. So mitochondrial DNA is really interesting because a mother will pass it to all of her kids. But if it's a biological male individual, they will not pass it to their children. So, for example, my mother and I likely match. I haven't tested, but I'm sure that we match mitochondrial DNA. We have the same mitochondrial DNA. And then I have given that same mitochondrial DNA to all 4 of my kids, but all 4 of my kids are biologically male. So when they when they have children, they will not pass that on. And so it's very interesting, but it can be very helpful if you can find a direct maternal line. However, so my sister has a daughter, and she's likely passed on the same mitochondrial DNA. And so that is one way that you can kind of, if you're wanting to match my mitochondrial DNA, mine will actually match with my niece. So super interesting, really helpful in trying to solve some complex genealogical questions on the maternal line, and especially when other methods have not worked. So, and this can be helpful when you either are more familiar yourself with how to do genealogical research, especially shared match triangulation, or when you're able to hire someone or get some extra help. And then when the priority is not on measuring genealogical distance, mtDNA, mitochondrial DNA, is a good one. It doesn't measure distance as well as other types of testing. So keep that in mind. All right. So we'll come back to, we talked a bit about this whole genome sequencing. It's been talked more and more about recently. So when you want more detail or information about certain health traits or mutations or conditions, this one can be more helpful. And when there is a need to provide more precise of a diagnosis to a health condition or provide treatment options if things aren't working. Sometimes this can be helpful when you have access or arrangements to receive genetic counseling to interpret the results more accurately. Sometimes that can be very helpful. And if you really enjoy having all of it in front of you and being able to study it one little bit at a time, but know that it can be misinterpreted often. And so getting access to genetic counseling is going to be really helpful too. And then it can actually better detect things like intellectual and learning disabilities they're finding. It definitely does give a whole lot more information. And so that can be really helpful. It's not as helpful with traditional genealogy, or it's not that necessary, I should say, to be able to track certain ancestors. It's not, whole genome sequencing might help you track more farther back, but it's not necessarily going to help you a whole lot more with genealogical research unless you have a very specific idea in mind and know what you're looking for, since there's so much information. All right, so we're on our last 2 slides, genetic genealogy overview. So I'm going to kind of go over these again, and I think my picture is in the way, so hopefully you can see this. So sequencing is at that last little box. You'll notice that there are X's in some of these as we go through them. Having more X's does not mean better. So I just want to make sure that's clear. This is just things that they offer. So for example, Ancestry does not have very many X's. However, Ancestry tends to have an incredibly large reference population. So they tend to have very good results. They also have a great interface, so it makes it easier for beginners to understand their results, and they're updated often. And so you get, so if you test now and you don't get the information you're hoping for, keep checking back because it changes often, and that's really cool. So it's just what it offers. So Ancestry really specializes in autosomal DNA. They don't do any of the other DNA tests. And they focus on really offering community forums, ways for you to find your ancestors through autosomal DNA. And they have great tools. I love it. I've tested it at Ancestry, and most of the time that's a really common place to test and to get really great information. So family tree, and that's actually one thing, sorry, they have community forums that are incredible. Their community forums are probably the best. All right, as we scoot over to family tree DNA, you'll notice they have lots of X's and they offer a lot of different types of testing. Their reference populations are not as big as Ancestry's. They do have community forums. They're not as in-depth, but they do have them. And it allows you, they do allow third-party uploads as well, which can be nice for you to, upload your DNA from Ancestry and get a little bit of more insight there and take a look and see how you feel. Every site has its own advantages. It has its own little tools or little tweaks that they offer that make it kind of helpful, but depending on what kind of test and what you're wanting to evaluate, that's something to consider. 23andMe offers ethnicity information. They offer a mitochondrial DNA test. And however, I think that's a new thing. I'm trying to remember, they may have actually outdated that just recently. I just saw that on there and I'm going to have to relook that up. So don't quote me on that one, the mitochondrial. They do offer health and trait insights, and that's actually really cool. And that's one of the things that sets 23andMe apart. And 23andMe has a large reference population as well, and they have community forums as well. They do focus, and I think they have the only FDA approved health and trait insights. And so they're going to give you a little bit more information on your health side, as well as understanding genealogy. You kind of get to choose a few different tests with 23andMe. So they have like just learning about your ancestry, and then they have ancestry and health. And so you can kind of choose between what you're wanting, but it does offer health and trait insights. That is an option. Living DNA. So Living DNA offers a lot of different kinds of tests. They offer third-party uploads and can give you some information on that. Living DNA has been around for a really long time. And it can be very helpful. They offer a lot of information on European populations as well. MyHeritage DNA offers ethnicity information and allows third-party uploads, but they only do autosomal DNA. So they're not going to do a Y-DNA or mitochondrial tests. They are trying to test a lot more to get a bigger reference population. So they have been improving more and more. And then Promethease. Oh, you know what? Is this sequencing? This is sequencing. Sorry, I assumed because my picture is over it, so I couldn't read it. This is sequencing, and this is similar to Nebula as well. This is the whole genome sequencing. They offer a lot of different tests, and they do offer a lot of health and trait insights. They're probably going to be best for health and trait insights. I don't believe they're FDA approved, but they do come from an approved and accredited laboratory where they're getting this. So it is reliable in that way. And some of this information can cause some anxiety for people who get a lot of health information and feel like, oh my gosh, I'm a carrier of this, or, everyone's a carrier of something. So, it's not always super alarming, but it's supposed to be empowering. So you have to go into it knowing that you're going to get a whole lot of information. All right. So I think this is it. Hopefully this helped you a little bit in understanding some of the questions you may have when tackling which place to test at and why you would test different kinds of testing and all of that. So thank you guys. If you can leave a comment, it would help me a lot for my class. I'd appreciate that. Or if you have a question, I would love to try to answer it. All right.